You're listening to The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
Is worship kind of like, yeah, something I got to do, 3 songs and then we can hear the message or whatever, okay? Do we truly know what it is that Jesus really did for us on the cross? I mean, he paid for our sins. He paid for all of them. In Luke 6:46, it says, Lord, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say? Are we faithful? Are we obedient? In James chapter 2, verses 14 to 17, do our lives reflect what it is that believing loyalty in Jesus does?
God can and will move in amazing ways in you if you let Him. But it takes action on our part too. It takes surrender to Him and a willingness to give up your own temporary pleasures to follow wherever He leads you. Today, Pastor Ken is going to show you that the song that Isaiah wrote to God's people when they started leaving God to serve idols, and the betrayal they put God through. Where once blessings were poured out and promised, now is the looming punishment that will come unless they turn back to Him. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Isaiah chapter 5 as he continues his message, The Artist Formerly Known as Isaiah.
All of the listeners that Isaiah has around him hearing this, they're fully in. They get what he's singing. He's using this picture. He's talking, it's a love song. He's talking about his friend who has this woman that this guy did everything for, and she wants nothing to do with him. So it's kind of like, now what do you do? What happens? Those who are listening identifies the picture of the poor grape harvest. They know, they're in. They see this imagery. If they had ignored his message before, they're not ignoring it now because they understand what that means. Now, I read it in just a few minutes, but if he's singing it as a song, I don't know how long it took. I don't know if he's doing a drum solo in the middle of it or anything else. I have no idea. Verse 3. So in the middle of this song, and everybody understands what's going on, he turns to the audience and sings to them, and now inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I've not done in it? Why, when I expected it to produce good grapes, did it produce worthless ones? So he switches from third person to first person, and he asks all the members of the audience, what else can I do? And his listeners are shocked because, everything was being built up, that this would be a great marriage and that everything was being done. And she said, no. So, they're shocked about that, first of all. They don't hear a lot of music like that. But now they're identifying with this picture of a woman scorning the one, and they all identify themselves in that picture, who had spent so much effort and time to win her. And by flipping to the first person in verse 3, he is now basically walking around the audience and saying, well, what would I do? What would I do? What would you do if this happened to you? This is what he's doing. He's asking, what would you do? They're all identifying and becoming part of the story. It reminds me of another guy who had the same thing happen to him. But at this point, they're yelling out suggestions, okay? I'm sure they are. What could happen? What could they do to prevent this from happening? Dig deeper ditches or, put in more grapes or they're probably yelling all these different things. I don't know what it is, but they're all part of it now. And we stop and think about this going, well, is that anywhere else in the Bible where that goes on? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. Jesus did this multiple times with the Pharisees. He'd reel them in, and he'd say, it's you. And they're going, oh, wait a minute. We don't like that. Well, a guy by the name of Nathan, who was a prophet, did the same thing with David. David had been fooling around, to say the least. He and Bathsheba did something they weren't supposed to be doing. She gets pregnant because of it. And then David brings his wife in and has him killed in the battlefield. And everything's good to go, right? Then he marries her, and he's got a little boy now, and everything's fine. And so we have the story of the rich man and the poor man in 2 Samuel 12. And Nathan uses this technique that Isaiah will use. And look at what David thinks and what he does as the story goes. So the Lord sent Nathan to David. And when he came to David, Nathan said, so Nathan's not singing, he's telling him a story. There were two men in a certain city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had great many flocks and herds. In other words, he had a lot, and it starts off as just an agricultural thing, but he's talking about something else. But the poor man had nothing except for a little lamb that he had acquired. He raised it, and it grew up alongside him and his children. It used to eat his food and drink from his cup and sleep in his arms. It was just like a daughter to him. Now, a traveler arrived at the rich man's home. He did not want to use one of his own sheep or cattle to feed the traveler who had come to visit him. Instead, he took the poor man's lamb and cooked it for the man who had come to visit him. Okay, David reacts to this. He is upset. He's really angry at this guy. He says to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. This is a cold-hearted crime. He should pay for that lamb 4 times over." And Nathan looks David right in the eye and says, "You're the man." Now, David got it. He repented. He still had some problems in his life, but he did repent. And you can see the rest of it if you look it up and read the rest of that there out of 2 Samuel. But that technique drew David in, and David is upset about a story he's the actual number one character in. So Isaiah's doing the same thing. The nation, the men of the nation, the ones that he just castigated in chapter 2, 3, and 4, are now around him listening to him, and he sucked them into the same point that they're just like David. They're identifying with what's going on in this song. So what more was there to do for my vineyard? I'm sure there are those yelling, "Nothing, you've done it all. You've done everything you can for this person." There may have been suggestions how to fix the situation. But the audience fully identifies with the futility and the severe emotional pain that goes along with love lost, or even if it's crop denied, because that was an emotional thing too. So Isaiah, after allowing for an appropriate time for crowd participation, I don't know if that's 20 bars of some other song or something else, but now he starts back up again in verse 5. So everybody's involved. They've all got their own solutions. And he says, "Let me tell you what I'm going to do with my vineyard." Oh, okay. "I will remove its hedge." Oh, yeah, that's right. Do that. "It'll be consumed." Yeah, that makes sense. You can hear him almost agreeing with him. "I'll break down its wall, and it'll become trampled ground. I will lay it waste. It will not be pruned or hoed, but briars and thorns will come up. I'll also charge the clouds to rain no rain on it." Wait a minute, you're not God. How can you do that? What, huh? But you can see where they're agreeing with everything else. Yeah, don't let her go to the beauty shop. Yeah, don't buy any more hairdos for her. Don't do anything else. It's possible that they were saying leave, okay? But the way that Isaiah presents it along the lines of going one more step, which is to destroy everything, was way beyond what the solutions may have been that were being yelled at to him. And as Isaiah begins in verse 5, you can hear the crowd agreeing along with him. Yeah, do it. I mean, he sucked them in. They're really part of this at this point. They would be agreeing with everything he is saying until he gets to that last phrase. Wait a minute, only Yahweh can stop it from raining. What do you mean, I won't let it rain? Wait a minute here. They may not have listened. They may have just said, yeah, don't let it rain too. I mean, they're emotionally involved in this, just like David was, okay? So Isaiah has them exactly where Yahweh wants them. They now can see the perspective of Yahweh. They're fully identifying with God's viewpoint of the situation. They don't know that it's them. So now God drops the hammer. Verse 7. "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his delightful plant. Thus he looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed, and for righteousness, but behold, a cry of distress." Bam, mic drop. Or whatever they did then, I mean, this is a love song, yes. It's one for Yahweh's love for Israel and Judah, and they've been brought along through 6 verses here, and they get to verse 7, And as he's singing, it hits him, oh, we're the vineyard. We're the ones who have turned the relationship into one of unrequited love for Yahweh. They weren't expecting that, not at all. He shocked his audience. He identified the characters in the parable by name. His well-beloved and the owner of the vineyard was Yahweh, was God, not some unnamed friend. And the vineyard is Israel, not his friend's wife. Oh, and all the men around him, they're the unresponsive vineyard, and they don't like any of this. This is almost like the way Jesus talks to the Pharisees, and he turns around and says, you whitewashed sepulchres. I'm sure that went over real well with them. And the problem is, as we see this, it also brings up questions about how are we doing as well, because it's a vineyard, it's a wedding, it's a love song, it's about a bride and a bridegroom, and you start thinking, what? The bridegroom's Jesus, the bride is the church, and the picture is applicable to more than just one period. Jesus has done so much for his church, the bride, right? How have we responded as a church? Do we take advantage of his grace? Are we, as the nation of Israel is, ungrateful and unthankful? Is worship kind of like, yeah, something I got to do, 3 songs and then we can hear the message, or whatever, okay? Do we truly know what it is that Jesus really did for us on the cross? I mean, he paid for our sins. He paid for all of them. In Luke 6:46, it says, Lord, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say? Are we faithful? Are we obedient? In James chapter 2, verses 14 to 17, do our lives reflect what it is that believing loyalty in Jesus does? What use is it, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but he has no works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, and yet you don't give them what's necessary for the body, what use is that? Faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. Works is not what saves us, but it's an exhibition of what's going on inside. Just as what he's about to talk about Judah, they're exhibiting what's inside, and it's not nice. We've seen pictures of it in the first 4 chapters. He's going to go through it here. The crop of bad grapes and good grapes, the good grapes, that's supposed to be justice and righteousness, if you look at it from that perspective. The sour grapes, not so much. In that verse, here in verse 7, is one of the word plays that Isaiah does. In Hebrew, he uses the word for justice, okay, mishpat, and he says you only get bloodshed. That's mishpah. The words sound almost alike, but they're not quite. And that's intentional. He does that on purpose. He also says the same thing, I'm looking for righteousness, tastakwa, but I only get cries of distress, tasakwa. Slight differences, and I'm probably not pronouncing the Hebrew correct, so please don't use my example as how Hebrew should be pronounced. But you're getting the point, though, that Isaiah's playing word games, and he's doing that within the song. They're picking up on that. He does this a lot, okay? So he has followed up this big reveal in verse 7, and now he's going to go into 6 woe statements. He's sung the song, the reveal has taken place, the song's over with, and now he's going to start saying, you're the man, just like Nathan did. But he's going to do it 6 times. So he's going to look at different groups that are around him, and he's going to be pointing out things that they're doing. And then he's going to get to a group of woes, and he's just going to say, this is all y'all. He's from southern Israel, okay? Remember that. Judah's in the south. Anyway. So he follows up with all these wrongs, the things they're doing wrong. The way I look at it, he's been singing this song, everybody's around him, and now he starts looking at the group. This is for you. This one's you. And he looks right at them, and he starts saying this. So first he looks at those, possibly pointing at them, who were busy making themselves large estates, okay? They were adding property, which today is not a big deal, but for a Jew, it is a big deal. Verse 8, woe to those who add house to house and join field to field until there's no more room, so that you have to live alone in the midst of the land. In my ears, the Lord of hosts has sworn, surely many houses will become desolate, even great and fine ones, without occupants. 10 acres of vineyard will yield only one bath of wine, and a homer of seed will yield but an ephah of grain. In other words, no productivity, no agricultural productivity at all. Now, the Torah in Leviticus 25 described that during a Jubilee year, every 50 years, all property would go back to the original owner, all of it. There's even a program in Leviticus 25 that explains how you can aggregate this, but it all has to go back. So aggregation of large estates in Israel at this time was a no-no. You weren't supposed to be doing this, but they are. In Leviticus 25, verses 13 to 18, here's some of the standards that they're supposed to be following. In this year of Jubilee, you must each return to your property. So, in other words, all debts are canceled, you get your property back. If you make a sale to your fellow citizen or buy from your fellow citizen, no one is to wrong his brother. You may buy it from your fellow citizen according to the number of years since the last Jubilee. So if you're buying it for 10 years, it's basically a lease. If the purchase price normally for 50 years was 100 pieces of silver, you would divide that by the number of years left, and that's what you would pay. So, 100, maybe it's only 10 pieces of silver. I mean, the bottom line is the property goes back to the owner when it's over with. You're not buying the property fee simple in perpetuity. It's just not happening. It does not happen in this country at this time, not according to what the Lord set up. The more years there are, the more you may make its purchase price. The fewer years there are, the less you must make its purchase price, because he's only selling to you a number of years of produce. No one's to oppress his fellow citizen. You must fear your God, because I am the Lord your God. You must obey my statutes and my regulations. You must be sure to keep them, so that you may live securely in the land. Did you catch that last sentence? If you don't keep it, you don't live securely in the land. That's the opposite of what he's saying. What's going on in Judah? They're not keeping it, and guess what's about to happen? King Ahaz is about to take power, and there's about to be a real problem that's going to exist in a lot of Judah. Property was supposed to revert to the original owner every 50 years. The nation wasn't doing it. In fact, we know that they did not keep the Sabbath years, which is why they were in captivity so long. Jeremiah pointed that out. It's 70 years because you owe me 70 years of Sabbath years. For 490 years, they had not kept the Sabbath year. So you know they didn't keep the Jubilee year. So by this statement, those who are doing that action, the Lord, through Isaiah, is signaling to those people around him one of the reasons why Israel and Judah can no longer remain in the land. The offer's there that we saw back in chapter 1, that offer's still there, but this litany of crimes against Yahweh is continuing. Those who engage in this estate building would wind up losing those estates with no agricultural production. And by the way, they don't understand that under King Ahaz, 100,000 are going to be killed out of the population of Jerusalem, and another 200,000 are going to go into captivity, going to the north to Israel. Who's going to be the tenant? I got this great rental property, but nobody's there to rent it. I got this great agricultural stuff, and I need to hire people to take care of it, but there's nobody to hire. Oh, this is what's preparing to take place. Now, King Solomon had given those who want to do this kind of activity, who want to do what they want to do, irregardless of what the law says, he wrote a book about that. It's called Ecclesiastes. He actually gave everything you weren't supposed to do a try to see how it worked, which is why he ends the book of Ecclesiastes saying, love the Lord and do what he wants. But in chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, here's what he says. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. So what he's saying is that I did all these things. I added property. I built all these houses. I did all this stuff. And at the end of the day, there was no profit in it. And that's what is happening to these folks who are adding all this property to each other in violation of what God said. Now, Micah is ministering during this same time period. And Micah talks about the same thing in Micah 2:2. He says this, they confiscate the fields they desire and seize the houses they want. They defraud the people of their homes and deprive people of the land they have inherited. In other words, they're violating Torah. They're violating what it says in Leviticus. That's it. They're not supposed to be doing that. They're violating the law. Therefore, what God says in Leviticus is you can't stay here if that's what you're doing. And it's all about to come down. Now, this is not something new either. You think, well, is this only starting because King Uzziah's on the throne and everything's good and there's money and there's a military? No. We go back a generation. Under Amos, he's the prophet. In chapter 2, verses 6 to 8, Amos says this, because Israel has committed 3 covenant transgressions, make that 4. I'll not revoke my decree of judgment. They sold the innocent for silver, the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample on the dirt-covered heads of the poor. They push the destitute away. A man and his father go to the same girl, and in this way they show disrespect for my moral purity. And they stretch out on clothing seized as collateral, and they do so right beside every altar. And they drink wine bought with the very fines they've levied, and they do so in the temple of their God. This is not new. One generation ago, this is what they were doing, and it wasn't real palatable either. It was rather sordid. So we come to the next woe. We first talked about the property, now we're talking about the next thing. So if you're busy ignoring Torah, you're going to have a problem with conscience, right? And they do. So that's why we have the next woe, verses 11 and 12. Woe to those who rise up early in the morning that they may pursue strong drink, who stay up late in the evening that wine may inflame them. Their banquets are accompanied by lyre and harp, by tambourine and flute, and by wine. They do not pay attention to the deeds of the Lord, nor do they consider the work of his hands. This is the second woe that Isaiah records. And he's probably still looking at the same folks, but he may have added a few more to it, to this larger group of drunks that are standing around him. Because if what he's saying is true, they're listening to him and they already got a buzz going. Whatever time of day it is, that's what they have. This group, because of the sin they're committing that we already read about in the first woe, they've got a conscience problem, so they're indulging that and getting rid of that by numbing their minds and drinking too much. They're drunks. And then what they do is, after they get themselves numb, they don't want to think about what it is that they're doing, so they bury themselves in entertainment. Does this sound an awful lot of like stuff that goes on in our culture today? Solomon's right, there's nothing new under the sun. The Bible doesn't condemn wine, okay? It just condemns the abuse of it. The group Isaiah is addressing is one that is engaged in the abuse of wine. And if you study the language carefully, you also look at it and it says they're also abusing beer, they're also abusing some kind of a wine mix that's almost like rum. They're doing everything wrong that they possibly can, and they're getting themselves to the point that they're just buzzed all the time. They double down then by engaging in the latest entertainments that the culture has to offer. So I don't know if they spend all their money on Netflix at night or on HBO or whatever, but they didn't want to have anything to do with reality. If there was a new movie out to watch, they'd catch it. If there was a new play that was taking place, and there were a lot of plays in ancient Israel, they probably went down to see it. They were doing everything they could to get themselves into entertainment. That might be why they're listening to Isaiah. He's just another singer. They're wanting all the entertainments that the culture has to offer. It keeps their mind off the sin and the duplicity they're doing. And by the way, it sure keeps them away from worshiping Yahweh. They don't want to do that either. Now, this second woe is followed with a bunch of impacts that actually can be measured. And Isaiah goes there. He says, okay, since you're doing this, here are the things that happen as a result of it. These are the results of the party lifestyle. So if you look at it, so this is the party group. This is what happens when they party. God sees the hearts, and he's showing Isaiah.
It's true that some of us are introverts and some of us are extroverts. But did you know Jesus designed us to function best when we're part of a community? We all have God-given gifts and abilities that, when used rightly and in conjunction with others, the effect for the kingdom of God will be profound. It will reach many who are lost and hurting. So, listeners, if you don't have a community that you belong to, won't you consider getting connected with ours? Or at least learning what we believe and why? The unsafebible.com has all that information, and we'd encourage you to read what's written there and then spend some time in prayer. The Unsafe Bible is a radio ministry based out of Jupiter, Florida. And we're so glad that you've paused long enough to listen to today's message from Pastor Ken. If you like what you heard today, and we've piqued your curiosity, why don't you satisfy it by checking out all the other messages we have for you? Go to theunsafebible.com and click on the Media tab. That's the direct link to our archive. We trust that what you find there will challenge and grow your faith. While you're there, be sure to check out the other ways to stay connected with what's happening here at Calvary Chapel, Martin County. Would you rather enjoy connecting through social media? You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Pick your favorite platform, or utilize all three. We trust that today's message from Isaiah spoke to your heart and challenged the parts of you that aren't looking like Jesus. Thanks for listening to The Unsafe Bible.